What a wonderful conversation with our new friend, Wendy. She manages a group home in England, and she was a foster child herself. So she was able just to share so much great insight into that world and mental health in relation to children in group homes and her own journey. And it was just so inspiring and fascinating to hear that perspective.
Absolutely. So I really was inspired by what she said about all of that, including her past, experiences with trauma and difficult situations, and how she's now using that in a positive way to help other people. And I think the biggest aspect of all of that was that for many, many years, she didn't even realize that she had been going through anxiety, right?
Yeah, it was like her normal.
Yeah, it's just and she was even going so far as to tell people it's no big deal. You'll get through it. It's fine. It's not even a problem, right? I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Not quite, but
yeah, and other people with anxiety, she would say, well, just get up and get on with it. Life throws things at you. So she had so much insight into how to be a strong support person as a parent or a caregiver.
For yourself and others.
Yeah, for yourself and for others.
For sure. And that might sound really negative too, but I think it's a really big positive because you might be in that situation right now and it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to kind of move forward and grow as a person, no matter how old you are.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing I felt so inspirational about her message is that she talks about how she had a panic attack. And it was full blown on an airplane, really serious panic attack. She thought she was dying. Yeah.
Super bad.
And she calls that the worst moment and the best moment of her life because it was the moment that things changed for her forever. And it helped her to understand herself better, and it helped her to get the help that she needed and then become educated to help others, which is, her story is just gorgeous. I love it so much.
Definitely very uncomfortable to go through. And obviously she wasn't enjoying that feeling, but she's thankful that it happened, that she could move forward beyond it.
Yeah, she's not the first person to say that either. We've had other people in different episodes say that one of the hardest things they've ever gone through was actually a blessing because it made them who they are. And I know the same thing in my own life. I had a challenging childhood, and there are other times in my life that I thought were maybe like really going to be hard, and they were, but ended up being the thing that made me the best version of myself.
That's great.
Yeah, and she, I think, had that moment a little bit later in life, which feels really shocking because you've gone your whole life living a certain way and now things are changing for you, or you're opening your eyes. But sometimes it takes that long just to realize where your anxiety or whatever your issue may be is stemming from, because she never realized that her anxiety had physical effects. She was like, it couldn't possibly be something in my brain because I'm having physical reactions to this. And so just staying informed and noticing things about yourself and trying to take a moment to figure out where your problems are stemming from or where your anxiety is stemming from is a huge step that you can take.
Absolutely. And to use those experiences, even if, she's still going on that journey now, she's still processing these things and working through them. But in that process and during that journey, she's giving back to others, and she's able to shed so much light on certain things and so much insight into things like certain behaviors that people may exhibit, and kind of digging deeply, like you said, into those layers and seeing, why are they doing these things? Well, instead of me yelling at this, this young man for misbehaving or acting out, I can dig into it and kind of see, why would he be acting this way? Is he just being a teenager, right? But with those different layers of mental health that we're examining, we all process things very differently, and they can manifest very differently as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure as a parent or a caregiver, and I'm sure, Mom, you can attest to this, but it can be really confusing and sometimes a bit frustrating when you're trying so hard to care for the people that you love and they don't have the reaction that you're expecting. So she used an example of foster parents who come to her and say, well, I bought them all these things and I took them here and I've got them therapy and I love them so much and I'm just giving them as much love as I can. And then they come home and they trash my house. And she was like, you'd have to remember that it's not about you.
Yeah.
And that sometimes you don't see the results of what you're doing then right in the moment. You might see it when they're adults and they come to you and say, thank you for believing in me. I know I was a bit of trouble for you, but it had an impact in the long run.
Yeah, that really made an impact on me because those children have obviously been through really hard times, but to her point, they're also teenagers. And I imagine that just about every teenager could look back and say, dude, I'm really sorry. I did not. Like, you did so much. You were so kind and loving and supportive to some adult in their life when they didn't appreciate it.
Our brains and minds are already going through so much at that age that, and then throw in everything else.
And then add childhood trauma on it, right? I was thinking about how you and I are educators, and I think that does stem from things in our past. And you know, there are reasons that we want to help people see the best in themselves or feel the most confident in whatever area of their life. I know that this is something that you and I were meant to do in the same way Wendy talks about her experiences that led her to help people. And I know that you're such a light and such a positive person in your courses, and students really appreciate that. Where do you think that stems from?
I think that actually... I haven't done the digging into this yet personally, but I think I suspect.
Throw that suitcase away.
There's a lot to unpack here. Let's just throw the whole suitcase out. I love that so much. But this is something I definitely want to keep and go through carefully. But what I suspect it comes from is my personal feelings about myself and my own confidence in those things. And instead of maybe doing the hard work and instilling myself with that confidence, I am instead putting that energy out there and helping others. And I think that helps me go through it as well, as I'm able to process my own feelings by seeing that potential in other people and helping them realize it about themselves. And then that makes me feel good when I hear that, oh, you helped me so much. I wish I could always feel that way. But
well, and that's, you know, you can have a day where the people that you're loving or trying to help aren't reacting in a positive way, and that can really affect you. And you just have to make the choice to try and understand where they are coming from and know that it's not about you and that your happiness doesn't rely on them.
Right. When I'm feeling that way about students, when you're really trying to help them and they're just not seeing it, and I'm sure the same can be said of friends, family, kids, right? I always have to remind myself to not take that personally, because like Wendy said, and like you said, it's not about me. It's their journey, right? And this is how I always navigate things. It's their journey, and all we can do is kind of help guide them the best that we can along the way.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things that she says is, if you buy a pair of shoes and they don't fit right, are you going to walk around for the rest of your life with bare feet?
Right.
Yeah.
And I love that so much because it's true. You know, our practices and our journey and the people in our lives. And at that point, she was talking about a therapist and how the first one might not fit in the way that you were hoping.
Right.
And it's a pain in the butt to like put the shoes back in the bag and print out a label. You know what I'm saying?
Mailing is hard.
Mailing is really hard. But to her point, good things and important things aren't always easy, but they're worth it.
Exactly.
She said that she's had some really nice experiences, some challenging ones as well, with the people that looked after her. But to those people that are taking a chance and doing the hard work and loving kids that need love and need support, we just appreciate you so much.
Absolutely do.
It's such a beautiful, beautiful thing that you're doing, and it makes all the difference, and sometimes probably doesn't feel like that.
And if you're a foster kid yourself, then hopefully this shows you some light at the end of that tunnel. And just to see, I mean, it took Wendy years and years to kind of realize how grateful she was for those families who helped her out, even though she might have acted out in the moment. But she definitely appreciates that help. Yeah.
And for people that are doing what Wendy's doing, literally thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
So with that being said, we were so grateful to have Wendy on our show, and we hope that you're able to feel a connection to her journey that we did. So grab a cup of tea and enjoy.
Health is understanding what you need,
being informed, finding that balance of mental and physical,
building yourself a support system,
figuring things out on my own and not letting it hold me back.
You do kind of have to advocate for yourself.
Because health, it's personal. Hey, Wendy.
Hey, Wendy.
Hello, gorgeous.
Hey, Wendy. So nice to meet you.
Hello, darling.
How are you?
I'm all right.
Before we dive in, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, both personally as well as professionally, and maybe just what you've been up to lately?
Okay. My name is Wendy Stirling. I am 49 years old and I live in Canterbury in Kent in England. I currently work as a residential homes manager for a children's home. I've done this work on and off for many, many years. Around 23 years all in all, in different forms. I am in it, what they call in England a former looked after child. I don't know if it's the same terminology in America, but basically I was looked after by the state from the age of 6 years old.
Yeah, I think we'd call it, what is it, ward of the state or foster kids? And
Yeah, so in England it's called being a looked after child.
Okay.
So I was taken into care at the age of 6 after suffering quite a lot of abuse as a small child, and basically lived through the care system right up until I was 18. Yeah, sort of did odd jobs here and there, and then sort of decided that, you know, I'd had a fairly good experience at certain parts of my life, being in a residential home, and maybe that I wanted to do that myself.
That's great.
Yeah. So I did some volunteering to start with and basically got a full-time job as a residential support worker back in January of 1997.
Wow. So it's been a little bit.
A long time ago.
Oh, and the rest is history.
Yeah. It's great that you took that difficult situation and you wanted to give back. That's really wonderful to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the time, living it, which I think is, you know, what you get for all looked after children, is like, I hate this place, can't wait to get out of here.
Yeah.
But, you know, you're able to reflect back and actually realise just how much it did me good, really. And I'd had sort of quite a positive experience there. I've left a couple of times through different things that happened in my life, but I'd always felt like I could connect with the kids really well.
Yeah.
And then about 10 years ago, completely out of nowhere, I was actually on an aeroplane coming home from holiday, and I like to call it my meltdown, but I had a complete and utter breakdown. I had the most massive panic attack mid-air in an aeroplane.
Wow.
Completely out of nowhere. I'd always been very self-sufficient, and then all of a sudden I was a mess.
Wow. Do you think it had been building?
I didn't realise what it was at first. That was 10 years ago, and it's been a real journey since then, with the anxiety, understanding it, where it's come from, how I've worked through it. Yeah, it's been quite an incredible life story.
That's amazing. To go back, do you feel like maybe you were experiencing anxiety when you were younger, but you didn't know what that was all about or what was causing it? Or do you think at one point things had been building up and then things changed for you?
No, it had always been there. You know, I've started to write a book as well, about my experience.
Wow.
And through that you can clearly see, you know, I couldn't step outside my front door. I couldn't drive my car. I couldn't make simple things like a cup of tea, like anxiety and the floor coming up to meet me. And I thought I was dying. I had no idea that it was anxiety for around 2 months. And then just the penny dropped.
It's bad if you couldn't even make a cup of tea. That's really, devastating.
Yeah, my whole brain just wouldn't function to do the most normal innate things, and I had no idea what was going on.
Right.
It was probably the scariest time in my life, which is saying a lot considering. But now looking back 10 years later, yes, everything, in answering your question, Karen, everything absolutely was there from the beginning. what I'd learned to do is I'd learned to use anxiety as a way of surviving my childhood, surviving, all kinds of abuse, neglect, because I subsequently went into counselling, and I was in counselling for around 5 or 6 years and did some really intense inner child counselling.
Wow. Yeah.
And then I went back to night school, and I'm now a trained counsellor.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I literally relived. The only way I got through the anxiety and came out the other side was to pretty much relive all the trauma through the counselling. But the anxiety itself is just, I always say it's the best and worst thing that ever happened to me, and the anxiety for me was definitely a coping mechanism that I'd subconsciously put in place as a child to help me to cope.
Brene Brown says that if you say things out loud, it takes so much power away.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that was the case for you?
Definitely. Through the anxiety, what I'd learned to do is, I like to call it the pre-anxiety, before sort of, that fateful day on the aeroplane.
Yeah.
Was not a conscious thing. It was completely subconscious. I had no idea that, that I was such an anxious person. To me, it was normal.
Yeah. I was going to ask if it just felt like it was a part of you, so you didn't really notice it because it's just always been there.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think I'd got to a point, I was 39, so I was hitting probably at the time midlife crisis. I'd gone away on holiday and had an amazing week. And for the first time, I'd probably truly relaxed, and I'd forgotten in that week's holiday to have anxiety.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask, what's that like?
Yeah. On the way home, it was like, oh my goodness, I've got to go back to how I was. And it was almost like my brain was going, no way.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I can see that. Yeah.
So,
where were you on vacation?
The Algarve in Portugal.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah, I was away with an old school friend of mine who's never quite forgiven me, bless her. But I was flat out in the aisle thinking I was having a heart attack, and is there a doctor on board? And the trolley dollies were flapping around, and
no.
it was just mental.
Wow. Well, I love that you described that, because maybe someone was thinking, oh, she had a panic attack, like she was deep breathing or whatever, but you went full in.
Yeah.
Honestly, and it's really unusual, really weird, although I'd lived with anxiety without realising it. For all of this, I had a partner that died 20 years ago, and he'd suffered with some depression. But I look back now and I think, oh my goodness. I didn't know any better, but I used to say, come on, you just get up and you get on with it. Life throws things at you and you just cope. And that was how I'd always lived.
yeah.
I love that you said that, Wendy, because, I think we don't know what we know until we know it. So that's not brilliant, but
it's true though.
Especially with supporting someone with anxiety or depression, you're trying to be that person, but if you haven't experienced it, to be on both sides of that. So you got to experience what it was like to be a support person and what it was like to actually go through it and know what you needed. I think that's a unique situation.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's even with the kids I work with as well. My empathy towards them, has always been very good. But pre the plane and post the plane, it's given me such an amazing understanding of what it's like to experience that form of mental health. Everybody's unique, don't get me wrong. Through becoming a counsellor, I learned that just because you've lived a similar story to somebody or suffered a similar thing, everybody's experience of that is completely unique.
Yeah,
it's like any major event in the world. People will deal with things completely differently, and there isn't one better than the other, but it does give you an understanding of what it's like. Have lived that kind of trauma, because I'd almost detached myself from it and used the anxiety to detach myself from the childhood trauma. So almost reconnecting with what we call little Wend.
That's cute.
Redoing some of that stuff, was the hardest thing I've ever done, but was the best thing I've ever done.
Wow, that's great.
I wanted to ask you how all of these experiences have kind of made you a better, stronger, more empathetic counselor. And maybe you could talk a bit about the work that you're doing now.
So yeah, obviously one of the things for me is being able to, I really want to be able to use my experience to try and support and help others. I've sort of worked my way up through the home and have recently been promoted, and I'm now actually manager of the house itself.
That's great.
Yeah, which, for me, sometimes I have to take a moment and think, wow, little old me.
Yeah, but a big responsibility too.
Yeah.
You can handle it.
I try to bring it in, obviously, the kids we work with. And I think one of the good things is the fact that nowadays mental health, I think, for children and young people is so better talked about, advertised.
I agree.
When I look back 20 years even to when I first started this job, kids didn't have counselling. It's one of the things that I really like to advocate, and all of the kids I work with, they all have a form of counselling once a week. They do group counselling as well with other, because we've got a couple of other residential units.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, group therapy work. They do individual counselling once a week. In my role, I'm homes manager. I'm not a counsellor. So I have to be very mindful.
Oh, yeah.
It's been able to understand that level of rejection more than anything, their parents not being able to look after them. And that tends to stay with them more in some ways, than any other form of abuse. And that's not belittling any other form of abuse, but the emotional impact for these kids is huge. So I'm able to have a sense of empathy for them that maybe others can't, because I've lived it.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, Wendy. How does that impact them, do you think, having someone that understands?
I think it's a huge impact for them because it is somebody that, as you said, has been there, although everybody's story is unique. And I always say that to the kids I work with, just because I've lived in similar circumstances to you, I'm not you, and I'm never going to be you. But what I can do is, listen and maybe show empathy at a level that others can't, and I see it almost as a gift
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, now.
Maybe not 10 years ago in any stretch of the imagination.
Wisdom helps.
Yeah, I just see it as such a gift now to be able to, and it's not just about the being a looked after child, it's about the anxiety and the mental health as well. I'm lucky I have a very good team of people that work for me, and everybody brings something different to the table. So I try to sort of teach them about having an understanding.
Right.
And for a little while, I actually worked for our therapy team, and I used to teach foster carers.
Oh, wow.
But I loved that. And one of the things I used to teach is you may not see the fruits of your labour right now, but what you can do is when they go on into adulthood and they start to often experience more anxiety, I find. And I always used to say to foster carers, you won't see the fruits of your labour necessarily now. It will be down the line when you get that phone call, when you get that visit, to say, oh my goodness, you believed in me, you got it, you understood.
It's not quite on that level, but I know we've seen the same thing with our own students. We have to remind ourselves in the moment in class, when they're yelling at us. No, just kidding. When they're upset or frustrated, we have to remind ourselves maybe down the road they'll realize this was a rewarding experience. But right now it's difficult for, especially at certain age groups or certain life circumstances. Yeah.
Yeah, and I used to have them, I used to have foster carers say to me, yeah, but I took them out and I bought them this and I spent all this money on them and I did this for them and that for them. And then they came home and trashed my house.
I think a lot of just parents feel like that.
Yeah, especially, I would imagine so. And I said, but in some ways, to them, who are you? And it's not that they don't appreciate what they've done. They just are suffering, mental health stuff that they can't understand and they can't process quite often.
Right. And I think that's really great advice because I think a lot of parents that we talk to and hear from are looking for ways to be a support person and accept that their role sometimes is just a support person, and not necessarily that that support that they're giving is going to see results right away. So I think that's really great advice.
I think if when you love somebody, you want to fix them. You want to make them better.
You want the best for them.
Yeah, I describe it as, as a parent, a carer, anybody that you love that is suffering with anxiety at that level. All you want to do is put a plaster on it and fix it for them. And I think for a person, like a parent or what have you, it's really frustrating because it isn't something that you can fix.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I always say it's just about being there and sometimes saying nothing and not trying to fix the problem.
But that can be hard to do when you're the support person too. When you're trying to help them, it's difficult to remind yourself, I can just be here. I can just listen. Because we want to jump in and do everything in our power because we want to fight for these people. But sometimes that can...
especially when it's somebody you love dearly.
Yeah. I wonder how little Wen would have felt if she had a crystal ball and she could have seen all of the good that you're doing now after all of the things that she'd been through. It's amazing.
It is a very good question. Yeah, no, again, it's something I've been sort of writing about and this sort of connected with little me. I think she would probably be, and this is what I've learned, is to appreciate myself a lot more, because our own sense of worth, especially when you're suffering anxiety and that, tends to be very poor. It's about acknowledging and being nice to big Wendy as well as little Wendy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you treat all these people amazing and give them so much grace and support and love. And we have to remember to do that to ourselves too, right?
That's such a big thing to remember. Would you say this to yourself? Would you say this to someone else, or would you treat someone else that way? No? Then why would you do that to yourself?
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's so hard to remember that in the moment.
Of course.
When you're beating yourself up.
What's the age group of young men that you work with?
13 to 18.
Okay, great. And is there something that you can think that you would have liked to have known or wish someone would have told you when you were that age?
Oh, it's hard at that age.
Could they have told you anything?
I think at that age, it's hard to have said anything really. So I think for me, all I wanted and all I can remember is just being devastated and wanting my mum, regardless of how I was being treated or how I was living. I think as a teenage person, which when I believe my anxiety came out more and more, really it would be that things can get better. If you work at it and you address it, then things can get better.
Like you're your own hero, right? You're the hero of your own story.
Yeah. People say to me, I've tried counselling, don't work for me. And, it's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's about finding the right counsellor. I say to them, okay, so you've bought a pair of shoes. They don't fit right. Are you going to walk around the rest of your life in bare feet?
That's a great way to say it.
Go around and, keep trying until you find something that's comfortable for you. You work, it will work. If you're prepared to put the work in, is actually to stop for a minute and think about what it is that's causing you this distress, which is a difficult thing to do. I'm not saying it's easy, because it isn't, but sometimes it's about just taking that moment to acknowledge the anxiety. Quite often in the beginning, I had no idea what was causing my anxiety at all, because it was so physical. To me, it couldn't have been something like that, because I never equated the physical reaction on your body to anxiety.
Yeah, I don't think people sometimes realize that it has such a big impact on your physical self as well. Wendy, do you mind sharing a bit about your book?
Yeah, it came from really my counselling. When I started my counselling, I used to, in the early days, have some quite strange and weird dreams. My counsellor suggested having a pen and pad next to my bed. And when I wake up and I was thinking something peculiar or what I thought was odd, would be to write it down. And it kind of started from there, really. And then before I knew it, I had like 6 books full of ramblings and
wow, that's great.
drawings and goodness knows what else, like all crazy things in it. And it became quite cathartic for me. So I actually started to write a book, which starts on the tarmac at the airport in Portugal.
That's a perfect start. Yeah.
Yeah, right into the action.
It's almost like starting from the very first panic attack, if you like, on the aeroplane. And then the start of the book is all about, you know, thinking I was having a heart attack, not understanding, you know, what it was, the process that I went through, getting to the point when I actually realised it was anxiety. So it took me a while to actually even get to the point to realise what it was. And through my writing, I was able to do that. So the book sort of starts, as I said, with the funny chapter of the trolley dollies flapping around trying to give everyone, you know, cardboard Pringles and undrinkable coffee. And the next minute I'm in the aisle of the aeroplane, flat on my back, with my friend looking at me like I'm in the final scene of the film Beaches. But I've tried to put humour into it as well.
Yeah, it's good that you can laugh about it now.
I mean, it's been very good for me. If it can help one other person.
Well, that's a beautiful motivation. And it sounds like the process is really powerful.
We can't wait to read it, though. I think it's going to help a lot of people.
One of the things my counsellor did, maybe not for the first couple of years, but really got me into reading self-help books. And there was one particular book. He's an American writer, and one of the first books that my counsellor gave me was a book called The Homecoming.
Mm-hmm. John Bradshaw.
And was the most powerful book I have ever read. You know, and I think the first year or so where I was so bad, you know, she didn't give it to me, but she gave it to me about 2 years into my therapy. And that book really did help to change my life and validate a lot of stuff that I hadn't realised I'd been feeling. He's very, very good, John Bradshaw.
I think that's a good point too. Sometimes it might be a great resource for you, but maybe not for you right now. I think that's such an important note.
Yeah, I like to recommend John Bradshaw to people, but I am also very cautious of how powerful that book particularly, or for me, I mean, everybody's different, but, you know, how powerful some of his books are, particularly things like The Homecoming, The Shame That Binds Us. You know, you need to be able to have support around you when you are reading them, to be able to just share some of the stuff that's in it.
Yeah, that's great advice.
And it can bring up some things, right?
Yeah.
Not a summer beach read.
Yeah.
Wendy, you're amazing. It has been incredible talking to you, and we could talk to you all day.
Thank you very much, guys. It was lovely.
Thank you.
So stay healthy and stay safe. Take care of those boys.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of Health It's Personal. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts for bonus episodes and new releases every Wednesday.
Please listen, subscribe, engage, and send us topics we can explore that would help you on your journey.
Because health, it's personal.